Hypothetically, could a country split itself into amicably? That's more or less what happened in the case of Czechoslovakia, which today is Czechia and Slovakia. Give all the citizens like 3 years to decide which country they want to live in and move to that side. This part is what's called a voluntary population transfer. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/population_transfer. And historically, transfer is a rough thing. Although 3 years sure beats the 2 months they gave to India and Pakistan. The resulting transfer led to *a million deaths plus gods know how many rapes, robberies, and assaults. Many examples were discussed already, so I will bring a less known one. Comers Island. The archipel was a French colony. They voted yes, no to independence. Most island voted yes and are what we call newcomers. Mayotte voted to remain with France. Technically they split the archipel without violence. Singapore, first country that didn't fight a war for independence. Wasn't 100% amicable though. Malaysia just said, you know what, you're independent now. Singapore used to be part of Malaysia for 2 years, but both sides can't agree on lot of things. Lot of tensions happened including bloodshed. In the end both sides discussed which lead to peacefully secession of Singapore from Malaysia. Almost 60 years passed, Singapore still supplied with cheap fresh water supply from Malaysia which cover about half of daily Singapore consumption today. KLSG is the busiest international air route in the world due to strong ties between both sides with some hundred thousands of citizens crossing to work daily. Edit. Someone mentioned Malaysia unilaterally voted to expel Singapore. This allegation's actually not true. The splitting process requires constitution amendments which requires 2/3 majority. The voting process involves the debate session before voting. Singaporean MP have a chance convince other MP to overturn the amendment, but none of Singapore MP come to debate or vote on that day. In other words, they didn't took the last chance to stay united as one. Before the proposed amendment were tabled in Parliament, several rounds of secret discussion and agreements are actually made between both sides to ensure both sides on a good terms after separation. There is also thousands of newly declassified documents, albatross files, kept by Singapore relating to Singapore-Malaysia separation discussion. So, both sides already know that splitting is the way to go to avoid further bloodshed. The voting is just to seal the secession. Despite most of the breakup of SFR Yugoslavia being bloody and hostile, the Republic of Macedonia, North Macedonia since 2019, declared independence in 1991 after a referendum and was not met with any resistance from the federal government in Belgrade. Yugoslavia's successor state, FR Yugoslavia peacefully split into Serbia and Montenegro in 2006 after a Montenegrin referendum. If the split was truly amicable, I think it would be reasonable to give everyone alive at the time dual citizenship. Czechia and Slovakia seem to have pulled it off. Only if there were clean and mutually agreed upon demarcation lines. The Soviet Union is still breaking up 30 years later, where Azerbaijan and Armenia are settling some truly unfortunate and relict border issues. 3 years is also not nearly long enough for it to be amicable. That's about how much time the UK had as it was leaving the EU to hash out a better deal than, fuck it, we out. They failed, and the reasons why are telling. Society's complex, and people on both sides of the split will stand to lose in different ways. Why they were in that predicament in the first place is also telling. The referendum almost certainly narrowly passed based on xenophobia, the fear of the migrants which the EU had been insisting they take their share of. It was a short-sighted knee-jerk split which is still screwing with them. https://www.cnn.com/2023/08/29/economy/uk-food-import-safety-br-index.html. 3 years on from the 3 years it took them to come to an amicable agreement with the Continentals. Never let short-sighted culture wars BS let you forget. You're a moron, and you don't know where all the fancy products of civilization you surround yourself with and take for granted actually come from. Your elected representatives and the industry leaders buying them barely know. So, libs get a country, patriots get another, probably isn't going to play to matter how sick you are of the arguments. In the American case, I picture an eternal armed conflict over the Ohio River Valley like it was Kashmir and 2 or more nuclear America derivatives. Fuck that. It's definitely possible, but not easy. It's what might have to happen to Belgium the coming decade. This is generally a bad plan. It was the British Empire solution in a lot of places. Wow, see, these Hindus and Muslims don't get on. Let's split India in 2. 1 bit for Muslims and 1 bit for Hindus, and let them decide where to live. What inevitably happened was the Hindus who had lived in the bits now so helpfully labeled for Muslims, and the Muslims living in the bits labeled for Hindus, suddenly found themselves to be perceived as interlopers in lands their families had lived in for generations, at which point they started butchering each other until most of Muslims had been killed or fled to the Muslim bit, and vice versa. Humans don't naturally live neatly divided into boxes for different groups, and there will always be lunatics who think they should fix that. Serbia and Montenegro was the successor state to Yugoslavia that existed from 1992 to 2006. I remember they split into 2 independent countries in the summer of 2006 because they qualified for the World Cup that year and still played as Serbia and Montenegro even though they weren't a unified country by the time the actual tournament started. They split into 2 separate national teams immediately after they were knocked out in the group stage. I'd say more common is chunks of one country becoming another country. Like USA buying Alaska and telling the Russians, "You're all American now unless you leave within 3 years." Most left, but some decided to stay. Do you consider colonies to be part of the ruling country? The British Empire broke up fairly peacefully. USA obviously had a war, but Canada, NZ, Australia, the Caribbean just kinda left. Denmark-Norway was a country for 277 years until Sweden took Norway. Then it was Sweden-Norway for 91 years, which dissolved peacefully. I'd say this type of thing was much more common in the past. Kings would get married and the kingdoms would merge, and then a few generations later they would split again. The peasants didn't really notice. They just kept farming away. The Quebec separatists have been trying to do so for years. Almost happened in the late 90s. Don't know if this counts, but when the Comoros gained independence from France, Mayotte voted to stay with France. It was not amicable since the Comoros still claim Mayotte, but there was no violence. Technically not what you are asking, as it was not independent, but it was, I suppose, a unique polity that got split up. I think if the US split, some foreign army would instantly invade one of them. I'd look up the Velvet Divorce if I were you, Czechoslovakia. No, the United States is not going to have a national divorce, and it'll definitely not be peaceful if it's forced upon us. Certainly applies to both Czechoslovakia and the United Kingdom of Sweden-Norway.